Just folks can see my screen, I hope. I think we all felt pretty relieved a little bit, but had a little breather with midterms. We saw some battling back of some of the crazy stuff that extremism we see in the battleground states, for example. And then as we know, the House went to Republicans, but it's very narrow, and I think they're still battling out who's going to be the speaker. December 2022, the end of right before Christmas, we all got news of the budget, the ombudsman package that they pass every year for the budget, the federal budget, but they also included in that an important legislation, which was the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act. So this is like the kind of one of 11 recommendations from the January 6th committee. And I'll talk about that a little later. So there's some good news, right? But we still have threats, grave threats, depending on who you talk to and read, to our democracy and our freedoms. And so that is continuing. And we know that the MAGA Republicans, and if you don't mind muting yourselves while we're going through this, that'd be great. Then you can unmute when you have a question or something or want to say something. That would be helpful. The MAGA Republicans are committed to use their control to basically my perception is to create chaos, which is what we're seeing this week with this struggle to identify who's going to be the Speaker of the House for the Republicans, or well, the Speaker of the House and the representative of the Republicans. They also obviously have had a strong influence on our Supreme Court under Donald Trump, who
there are 31 people there.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Can you mute yourselves, please? I'll just mute. So then we have there's been some inroads in state governments, however, though, with the extreme right, and there's still this threat. We'll talk a little bit about that. A call to action today and going forward as we go into 2023 is continuing to push for accountability of those, the higher up in the government, starting with Donald Trump and his co-conspirators with regards to the insurrection on January 6th. And then as well as engaging with our elected leaders to continue to press for their to lead in legislation that will protect our voting freedoms and other freedoms, as well as deny MAGA agendas. So unfortunately, although we might be exhausted and tired, I think, as I know, I sometimes feel there's still work to be done. So real quickly, my agenda is kind of 4 parts: a brief remembrance of January 6, 2021, a pause for some gratitude. I know I always feel like I have to have a source for hope at times, and so it's helpful to think about what I can be thankful for. A little bit more about the MAGA threat that I outlined there, and then some call to action and opportunities that we could take action and commit to by the end at the end of this hour. So here's just some images that I had actually put together a year ago. I've been to the Capitol. If folks want to, show their hands, if they know how to do the hand function down below, feel free to do that. Just raise your hand to say that, if you've been to the Capitol. It's always interesting to see who's actually been there. A lot of people don't get that opportunity. I've been there a number of times. And so I've actually gone through the security, experienced all that, the reverence, etc. And then when I saw this happening, I was just appalled, afraid. It was a lot of emotions kind of went through for me, and I'm sure yourselves as well. And I think a good question is how should a civil society respond to losing an election? And I couldn't stop but contrast these. because we have the Women's March that was on January 2017 after the President Trump's inauguration. I actually went to his inauguration and I went to the Women's March. And then this event on the preceding President Biden's inauguration. And there's just a world of contrast in terms of how that showed up, how people showed up. I don't know if there's people who've gone, who were in the that attended the Women's March. Thanks everybody for your chats. And it's a very different experience for sure. Although I can't say I was at one on the 21st, on the 2021. So I guess what I'd like to pause for just a moment is, how did you experience that day? Where were you? I would like to try the breakout room just because there's how many are there of us? There's about 33. Maybe we don't need to do the breakout room. I can just stop sharing if people want to share how if anybody would like, I'd like to invite anybody who would like to share, maybe allow for a couple folks to share what they felt about that day or how they experience with that, emotional experience that they're open to sharing, and you can unmute yourselves.
Well, the place I go to pretty easily with things like this is to anger.
Mm-hmm.
And disbelief that, well, anger at essentially 50% of the people in the US are in a different boat than I'm in, and disbelief that that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do we do with that? What do I do with that? I don't know, but it's pretty sad for me. I'm finished.
Yeah. We got some comments also in the chat. Thank you, Randy, for that.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to share verbally, or the?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was watching the certification live,
Mm-hmm.
and so I kind of saw things unfold, and I was appalled and really saddened, I think.
Thank you, Claire. Anybody else want to share? Was anybody afraid? I felt like we were vulnerable to an attack. I was like, someone could just like attack us right now because we're so messed up. Just like, who's in charge? And I was crying and I was holding my grandson, and my daughter's walking up. She's remotely working at the time. And she's like, are we going to be okay? Anybody else? You got some?
I was at work, and I had one of my coworkers was a Trumpster, and he said, "Oh, this is wrong," when we were watching it, and he went home. But I think he continued to be a Trumpster, and we never talked about it again. And I'm sorry that I didn't discuss it with him further, because I thought it was very important to point out to the people that were supporting Trump what was happening in his name. This was murder. Anyway, it was a terrible day. Still is a terrible day. And I hate to keep being reminded about it on TV. I'll never forget it. Never. Never.
Thank you, Francis. Scott, Nevi, did you want to share anything before we move along?
Yeah, yes. I was in disbelief that day. And the numbers, I mean, it wasn't like the million people march that the women put on the day after the election, not my president. I mean, this was just a band of renegades. And I don't believe that they represent even half of this country. I mean, a fair size, but I still believe we have enough collective sanity
Mhm.
amongst us to overrule. And these people were lawbreakers. A lot of them have been brought to justice.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Scott. Abby, did you want to add anything? Or you?
No, I'm done.
Yeah, I remember very clearly hearing enough stuff to be very concerned. And I was appalled at the lack of protection that there was when they came. So I am still very concerned because that hasn't been dealt with a lot, at least openly. And that was not what the January 6th committee was really looking at. Hopefully that's being dug into and taken care of. Because if we have plenty of people, we know they're in the police, we know they're these active people are ready again. And I couldn't believe it. So there was something going on about keeping the protection down.
Great. Thank you, Abby. And I think it is in the recommendations to have a more secure day, higher level of security on those days. We'll get to that in a second. Scott, is it quick or can I move along?
Well, just remarking to what that person just said, that was all planned.
Yeah,
The lack of projection and up the chain of command, it went all the way up to Trump. And he did nothing about it. No, it was purposeful.
Yes, it's very, and I think we learned, I guess, kind of jump, but I mean, not everybody's showing their camera, so it's hard to do a show of hands, but I'm assuming, folks, one of my poll questions was going to be, how many of you watched the hearings? Did you watch all of them? Did you watch 0? Did you watch half? Yeah, I see some hands, so if you show your hands, that's like, I see some hands coming up. Yeah, great. I mean, a lot of folks didn't watch it, I think, but probably speaking to the choir today. But I still think, I don't know about you guys, but y'all want to sit there and watch a show, a series, at the sofa on sofa at night. We got into these streaming things. I think that those videos are it's a whole mini series. So I'm encouraging people to watch it because now, of course, you can't get it off the website. They took the website down, but you can go to YouTube and get the information. So let me go ahead and so gratitude. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing in the chat. And people can look at people's chat there. Heroes that day were absolutely unbelievably courageous, and I think we've all heard that. And but I just remind us of those folks. I think another hero this past year is this January 6th committee. They had the 2 Republicans there, and as a reminder, there was an attempt to try to get a true, full partisan, but the many of the representatives voted against that. So there was resistance to, from the beginning, there was a desire to not have this committee do its work that we would normally expect. And I have references on that in my back slides. But we also saw, someone mentioned earlier, we've seen prosecution of some of the folks that were involved in the violence. We just recently saw the Oath Keepers leader, I think it is, and there's still more to come. I don't know if there's been, the outcome has happened for the Proud Boys yet, but I think that bodes well with the DOJ as being effective in terms of their ability to prosecute. But again, as we mentioned, there's still a desire to prosecute those who were the ringleaders for this. And when I did this presentation last year, I actually used Wikipedia, and I had a whole timeline all the way up prior to the election showing data that I had referenced or researched and got where, President Trump was determined not to leave office. And some of these things that came forth in the committee meetings just were examined and validated what I was discovering a year ago. Anyway, it's good to see the prosecution starting to work. We hope that they'll do more. December 23rd, the final thing that's really something to be grateful for. I was really kind of afraid it wasn't going to happen before we switched houses, leadership of the House, but the passage of the ECA Electoral Count Act, which longer words is Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act. So just here's some of our heroes. And you guys can see my screen, right? Can
No, no,
you see my screen?
nope.
No,
Right
Oh,
now.
now you can?
it's kind of, yeah, it just came
There
up.
you go. There you go.
Were you able to see it? Well, I was talking a minute ago, I hope.
No,
No,
we
Oh,
just
you
saw
weren't?
it. No,
Oh,
just
I
a minute.
apologize.
we can see it now.
Okay, so some of the gratitude that I wanted to note is those that defended the Capitol. These folks all testified the summer of 21. You can still see those tapes on YouTube. That was the beginning of the work of the committee. And last year, part of my January 6th day, we wrote thank you notes to these folks. I had addresses and stuff, and I can provide that to you today as well. If you so desire to write, I think Officer Fanon is now a commenter for CNN, I believe. Yeah. So this is the work of the committee. There's 11 recommendations. Only one has been completed, and that's this Electoral Count Act that I just commented on. For context, this was gratitude heroes, committee's work, the DOJ's prosecution, and the passage of the Electoral Count Act. The accountability, criminal referrals to the DOJ, we heard a lot of that in the media. Also on these 11 recommendations, so there's if you can look this up at this link here, and I can go ahead and put that in the chat, or send it out in the minutes if you like. But the accountability or violent extremists really talking about white supremacists and domestic violence, domestic terrorism, basically. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, this is the part that basically in our Constitution, which I was looking at for a while now, I was like, why isn't this being leveraged or applied? And anybody who participates in insurrection is disqualified from office. It's pretty black and white in our Constitution. So there's a recommendation to push that. There's a national special security event now, which gets to the question, I think what Evie was talking about, the security of the actual counting process. They will now call it a special security event. There's also recommendations on beefing up the criminal statutes and the penalties. There's also language around prosecuting the attorneys and a separation, that there needs to be clear separation when a lawyer is representing a client in a campaign, for example, that colluding, worry about colluding, and where a lawyer becomes more politically and maybe goes off the rails legally. Strengthening the subpoena effort. We know that there were a number of House members that didn't follow the subpoena. There was threats to election workers, so they addressed that. Capitol Police oversight, again, making sure we have stronger preparation. Also a recommendation on the role of media in radicalizing consumers of media, primarily social media. But there's also media outlets, I'd say Fox is one that is very concerning these days. Discuss the application of the Insurrection Act, because there was an attempt at times by President Trump to incite this Insurrection Act, ironically. So action today for you, homework assignment, what you have is, if you're so inspired, send a note of gratitude to members of this committee. With a couple of exceptions, Liz Cheney obviously is no longer in office, nor is Adam Kinzinger, but you can find their addresses through house.gov. And I wrote them thank you notes earlier this year, just saying thank you for doing this important work. And it might be, and as well as these officers we talked about. That's just, and then going forward, we got to hold our government accountable. Here's a little bit more about this Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act. This is what was just passed and signed into law by President Biden around December 23rd, I think it was, right before Christmas holidays for folks that celebrate Christmas. It clarifies the role as vice president is purely ceremonial. It raises the threshold for members of Congress to initiate objections to electoral results to 1/5 of the body of that chamber. I think we saw a lot. We saw, that would have been helpful to avoiding some of the issues we had 2 years ago. It also ensures that one conclusive slate of electors from each state, one conclusive slate of electors. That was an issue that has also came out of the committee's work. They also outline a process for expedited court review of election results, so there's not this, gap and security concerns, and then they tightened up the scope and power of the courts, such as the Supreme Court versus making sure it's respecting the state courts, because the electoral votes are done at the state level, and they wanted to kind of shore that up. They also, in this law, Congress must respect the state electoral counts that are submitted as conclusive. So these address some of the issues that we heard that day, and the days leading up to January 6th, the counting of the electoral votes, where we had about 127 representatives pushing for denying the votes of Arizona and Pennsylvania, for example. And some of those folks are still in Congress. Many of those folks are actually still in Congress. So before I go on, is there any comments or questions that people chomping at the bit to add here? Since I can't do any polls or substance, but
You were talking about thanking members of the committee.
yeah,
I think that's great. I think that our Congress people, and in this case, members of that committee and others who work for us, have a pretty thankless job. And
yeah,
I know that I have called members of Congress just to thank them about something in particular, and tell them that I think they're doing a great job. And the receptionist at the phone says, this is one of 10,000 calls that we get that is appreciative. So it does make a difference. I mean, it is good for them to hear.
yeah. Thanks, Randy. I think that's an excellent point. And even just thanking the staffers,
Yeah. And
Thanks for-
this
yeah.
this was a heroic job that this committee did. I mean, the time, energy, all the people, brain power, brain work, just
Yeah.
quite incredible.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat for people if you're interested.
Yeah.
This is where you can find, well, actually that link didn't go. If you do a Google, you should be able to find the January 6th report. There's also CNN has a link to it, 800 plus pages. I know someone commented earlier that they started reading it. Thanks for the links that people are putting in here. This is great. Yep. And I assume folks are taking time to read people's comments. That would be great. Yeah. I'll come back to your comments on my own, because some of them look fairly lengthy, and I definitely will take note of them and incorporate them in the presentation. Did someone else want to say anything before we move along? I want to dive into MAGA, our favorite topic. Not.
I'd like to say something. I don't see
Oh,
it.
Evie, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't see a chat on my bottom thing, so I'm not sure what happened to it. Anyway, Rachel Maddow has put out an app called Ultra, and if you
Yes.
listen to it, it's extremely well done. She didn't mean to do what she did, but kind of tripped on the information and then delved in. But what is extremely amazing about it, and that we should know, is that it was done, something similar was done, or actually much worse in the 40s. That these were people openly working with the Nazis and
Yeah,
taken to court. They did get that far, but the judge could not handle the court. It was absolute chaos for days and days, and those people were never indicted. And her message at the end, I mean, you should really listen anyway, but spoiler, I'm going to tell you, it's that they were never indicted. And her comment is, it's the people that have to see and follow and watch and get rid of these people, because you can't leave it up to the courts. You know,
right.
them somehow. And we're noticing that in other countries where this has happened recently, because fascism stuff is happening all around the world, some of the people caught trying to do this kind of coup were immediately put in prison. Within a week, they were taken.
Yeah,
And
Germany, right? Was,
what we're doing. And all along the way, Trump could have been gotten on things that were so obvious, and it's never happened. So I'm worried. I'm worried about how our democracy has been very, very loose, and can let these people go and stay. The ones
Yep.
that are in our Congress stay.
yeah.
where they
Yeah, I
participate.
was actually curious. One of my poll questions was, is anybody, and I look like we're all West Coasters, at least in my first glance, but anybody in this group have a Republican congressperson or have a Republican senator? Are we all in the choir together? Because I'll pause there if anybody, Randy? You're on mute, Randy.
Rep is, and I can still vote in Washington State, right? Because that's where I came up from as a dual citizen. So I have a Congress, a House rep who is a Trump clone.
Oh, okay. Which are you? Is that Eastern Washington then?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Someone's raising their hand. Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I'm managing screens here. That would be, okay. Yeah, so I think, those of you who have Republicans, how can we help? Joan's raising her hand too. I mean, it's just sort of like, I feel like we're, I got Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, a number of us do. It's like preaching to the choir and they're champions. But, and then, occasionally I'll call the Republican from a different state, but, at the end of the day, they want to hear from their constituents. So how can you, the constituent voice is so important. So I really encourage you to be active and get your friends and family who are in those same situations where they have Republicans to be active in that. So, okay, let's see, I'll move ahead. So I put the link to the final report for your, reading material if you're interested. I'm going to keep moving here. Let's see. I didn't have the link for Rachel's, but I can put it in my notes afterwards, or someone maybe could pop it into the chat. But if you just do a Google on your podcast, she did one also on Nixon's era, actually the Vice President Agnew, and why we ended up with President Ford. That was fascinating too. That was our first podcast. So I mentioned this electoral count or act is now in place, and MAGA. So even though I felt like we had some success in, we all felt maybe yes, wasn't a red wave, that was great, but this MAGA still made a lot of progress, unfortunately. So one is they control the House of Representatives, as we all know, but also over 2/3 of the US House of Republicans are election deniers. So 135 incumbents who voted against certifying President Biden's electoral college are returning, and then 27 more new ones are the election deniers too. So we got a full house, no pun intended, of election deniers, and you have to be steadily working on how to free us from that kind of insidious nature. They also gained power in the Senate. And note here, there were 4 open seats. Many of us were following those races, and unfortunately didn't prevail, although fortunately Pennsylvania, of course, but Wisconsin, etc., kept Ron Johnson, blah, blah, blah. MAGA also has control over the courts. This is an area that I'm actually doing presentations on, just as a side, thing that I'm really fascinated with. And I'm working in collaboration with my mother, who's a retired attorney, and we just did, I'll share that at the end, but the courts, suffice it to say, we have to look beyond just the one branch of government. We have to look also at the court, and it's quite concerning. The Supreme Court is definitely, I would call it an activist court now. They're overreaching, and we have a disabled Congress that can't legislate. So we really need to have, whenever we've had in the past an active court, an overreaching court, Congress has, acted through a judiciary act to really kind of rein that in. And right now we have a dysfunctional Congress. So it's going to be really tough to rein in this court we now have, of which 3 of the folks are from President Trump's appointments. And then we have MAGA. I was stunned to learn this: 22% of all the of GOP state lawmakers on the far right won their election. So although we were hearing progress in some of the swing states, there's still this continual erosion and MAGA effort at even county and state levels, and at those levels of courts. So we really have to continue to be committed to fighting for our democracy. And so what's still left to be done, and then some actions and resources. Again, if you're a tweeter, go ahead and there's hashtag Our Freedoms Our Vote. I used to tweet, I don't do it anymore. So here's just some recommendations for today. We had these recommendations last year, honestly. So some of them anyway. So continue to engage with our congresspersons, your rep, your senators, and push for, so there were 2 voting acts, and most of you will probably remember in January of last year, there was quite the showdown at the Senate House, and the filibuster came. We all started to learn a lot more about the filibuster than we probably ever wanted to know. And it prevailed so that we were not able to have a simple majority pass the FTVA, Freedom to Vote Act, which is quite broad and extensive. And then it was really a shame, though, to not even pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which was targeted at addressing the courts. Basically, you might recall, I think it was 2011, 2008. I don't have my notes in front of me, but where we had Shelby v. Holder basically said that nullified the Voting Rights Acts of the 60s. And basically they said the formula that you're using is too old and antiquated. You need to come up with a new one. So they gutted that part of that legislation. And Chief Justice Roberts was actually, I read about an excerpt from him. He basically said, you just need to update that in a sense, people might argue that was more than that to it, but that's what this John Lewis Voting Rights Act was really about, is my understanding. We need to continue to engage our Congress folks in addressing the remaining 10 recommendations from the January 6th committee. Another one that folks are less aware of is this push for DC statehood. It's unbelievable that I think DC's population is around 700,000. It's about the same size as Wyoming, and they do not have any representation in Congress. And it's basic taxation without representation. So I kind of started learning about that just within the last 2 years, and I was like, wow, that's just not right. So, and then there's, of course, other folks advocating for voting rights in like Puerto Rico, et cetera. But DC has no representation. I think Puerto Rico has at least representation in the House. To hold Republicans accountable to democracy. So those of you who have access to Republicans, encourage them to not die, not to be pulled and sucked into the MAGA, or find the truth. And then and also try to find better candidates than them as the elections come up. We need to rein in the Supreme Court. I mentioned that earlier. One thing that I've become aware of, it came out of Judge Jackson's hearings is this lack of a code of conduct. It's the only court in the country that doesn't have a code of conduct. And so there is legislation in the Senate for implementing a code of conduct. There's also a push for more transparency. We had a moment of transparency with COVID, but now they're pulling back on that. And I've actually gotten to sit and listen, to the arguments. That was pretty exciting, but I get 10 minutes and then they move you out. They move you like a, tour group, you get in, you stand in line. It's really hard to go hear these guys and gals and hear what they're thinking. So we really need to have, it's the one part of our government that has the least transparency. And then there's a number of judiciary acts that are in an effort to, there's one about expanding the court, which is fairly political. They're in the sense that this has been tried before. President FDR Roosevelt, he did that. He failed, but he had the impact he wanted, which was the court at that time was not going to support his New Deal legislation. And because he made an inroad to retire justices as well as expand the court, they started, lining up and behaving themselves a little better, and were less of an activist court at that time in the 30s. But the key one is term limits, and there's some really good, all of our federal judges are in there for life. So there's one that's kind of compelling, which is rotating the judges, and then you wouldn't violate the life term, but you'd still have a rotation. At this point, this court here is, Chief Justice Roberts will be 85 in 2040. And this is a very young court. So this court started under Roberts in 2005. And one would argue in one question, are they legislating from the bench right now? Because they can. Another thing for us to do is, what can you do at your state and county levels? Continue to grow your knowledge in civics and be vigilant in checking your own biases, our own biases and disinformation. And I have some information on that next. And then, of course, vote. So I think, looking at the time here, I was thinking this group would be maybe super big because I had like 100 registrations. So I have 31 people, so, which is awesome. But are there any, and given our time, I won't do the breakout group, but I just ask you to maybe take a moment to think about what you can commit to. What I will ask right now is just stop. Is there anybody there? I listed some actions. Is there anything that you think I should have included in that list that you're like, absolutely, we should be doing this? I'd love to hear that and add that. Karen, you've got your hand up and you're on mute. So go ahead.
Yes, I stumbled onto Michael Moore's Blue Dots in a Red Sea daily. Blue Dots in a Red Sea. And he is taking people who want to really get involved. He has taken this a whole new direction, and it is exciting. And he has a pod, I guess you call it a podcast, every day. It's only about 15 to 20 minutes long. And he uses his humor and he uses his love of people. He sounds like a minister, really. And he says, here's what you need to do. He's sick and tired of hearing blue people say, I live in a red state. What can I do? I live in a red state.
What was it called again? Blue Dots in a Red Sea?
Blue Dots in a Red Sea. And he has an answer for every state that is a red state, because he knows he's down at the level where he's talking to people all the time. He knows in every one of those red states, there are thousands and thousands of Democrats or left-leaning who do not talk to each other. They don't know each other, and they just don't happen to be real extroverts. So it would take being a little bit of an extrovert to follow what he says, but I would watch those. I've watched 8 and 9. I'm on 9. Number 2 is the very best one. He comes across as just the biggest lover of people, and he tells you to find a Democrat somewhere who will want to get together with you, and then you get a 2 or 3 and you get more, and you make your own precinct. He said the Democratic Party isn't doing anything with the Democrats in the red states. Democratic Party has given up on the red states. No, they're full of Democrats. They just aren't together. So in these 9 episodes, He just blew my mind, and he has a lot to say, and it's really could work for the extroverts out there to reach out and get people together.
Thank you, Karen. That's great. I added it to my slides, and I also see that you put it in the chat for folks. So please take advantage of the chat, you all. And got some thumbs up for you. That's great. And
Who was the speaker in that series?
Michael Moore, is what she said.
Michael Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
He's a movie maker, filmmaker. And I think I'm a precinct person now. And I knocked on independent doors this year, and I had some great conversations. And it was like, people, if you're friendly, I'm pretty friendly, I think. You just like talk about what they care about. And a lot of them just like, I just want everybody to get along. And like, don't we all want that? It's exhausting being angry, and I found it exhausting to be mad. And I also feel very unpowered in, unable to act in the right way. So I think
And this isn't, sorry, this isn't just about getting together and having a good time. This is about running for local offices.
cool. Okay, great.
Run, and then you
Right.
step up, and then you get someone else. Oh, I know some, and then you get someone else to run, and you start slowly affecting your county and your city and your state. And pretty soon, the people find their power.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks everybody for the links in there. I think I have one more, maybe two more slides that I'll go back to just to share. So I want to honor your all time. Some of you might be on your lunch break. Let me see, got to share again because I start yapping. I'm a good yapper. You probably figured that out by now, but it is a pleasure to meet you all today. And I'm really glad that you came. So here is a little bit more detail on, what I just shared, which is kind of actions we can take, but you can learn more about January 6th. This is that other link. I've also put it in the chat. If you're interested about the Supreme Court, we keep hearing it in the news. There's a lot of key cases that they're hearing. Trivia tidbit, I did not know, but they get 80 to, let's see, 8 to
Thanks,
80,
Nora.
8, you're welcome, 80 to 90,000 requests to hear the court to hear, and they only pick 80 to 90 to hear. And it's unbelievable to some of the ones that they pick. Anyway, one key one is Moore v. Harper, which is the
Thanks,
North Carolina. Oh, you're welcome. Is that someone saying something? Does someone have a question?
No, I just said thank you, and I'm kind of lost trying to
Oh,
navigate.
Zoom. You're welcome. And there's some links in here about the Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse done a lot of good work on uncovering some of the things that motivate our Supreme Court. It's actually very concerning. There's a website for Fixing the Court that talks about some of the things I mentioned earlier. There's my own YouTube channel that I'm doing now, which is my mother and I, the lawyer and the scientist. I'm a scientist. So I love doing research and coming up with key takeaways. And we're going to talk about Moore v. Harper, which is the case before the court that discusses the independent legislature theory, for example. We're also going to talk about the shadow docket, which is how the court gets some work done without telling us anything about their thinking. So there's a lot there. Find factual, actionable, hopeful media. So on the right here, I've got the Hubble newsletter. Probably some of you are subscribers already. Jessica Craven, your local paper. I just started reading my local paper just so I didn't have to have a voice and opinion and emotion attached to what I'm listening to. And then I added the Blue Dots and Red Sea. If you guys have other references, please put them in the chat. I'd love to build up my own. I'm always learning, and that's the best we can do is keep learning. This Fox video I watched a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago, and I've had this happen in my very own family, and maybe some of you as well, where people just get sucked into Fox, and there is definitely a formula to how they do that. And it's a big machine, and it's very concerning for all of our friends and family and people that we care about get sucked into that world. Developing practices for managing your own media influences and we all have biases. And so here's this is a great link that'll take, I learned this through some Democracy Now! Training. this is a good one. There's lots of fun quizzes. So you can check your own biases. It educates you on how to look at media, how to critically think about it. So I really and highly recommend this. In fact, I will go ahead and put it in the chat because it's such a great reference. And let's see. I'll just control. Take it right here. So it's this news literacy project, and there's more than just the quizzes, of course, but I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. You might find that very interesting if you don't know anything about it already. And then let's see. Okay, yes, we got some good news, but there's a lot of not so, there's still MAGA is still working hard to persist, right? And so we have a call to action. We all hope there'll be some accountability at the top. We want to continue to push the non-MAGA Republicans towards democracy and away from MAGA. We want to demand Congress pass legislation to shore up our democracy and address the Supreme Court overreach. And like some of you have already mentioned, we really got to figure out how we come together and seek unity over strife. It's best for our health and it's best for, I mean, it's sad to think there's people I don't talk to anymore because I felt threatened by them. You know, I had to stop being their friend on Facebook because I just felt like I'm not safe, you know, and but yet I still have some people in my orbit that are that thinking, and I'm trying to figure out, well, I'll have coffee with them. I'll still, how do I, you know, what I encourage you guys to think the same, you know, how do you do that? So my last slide, which is just a big, huge thank you. I just stopped sharing because in case someone wanted to say something. Well, I guess I can share it, but anyway, thank you so much for making today, making this hour, and that it's important to you. I appreciate that I'm not alone in this journey. So if you would like these slides, did people get my emails earlier today, this morning?